Get that woman off my aircraft or these engines aren't starting, and I don't care if we sit here all day while you figure out how she scammed her way onto a $60 million jet." Captain Dylan Pierce's voice cut through the luxury cabin like a blade through silk. His silver hair perfectly styled and his uniform pressed to military precision as he pointed a trembling finger at the woman sitting quietly in seat 1A. The silence that followed was deafening, thick enough to choke on. Dr. Zara Williams didn't look up from her phone immediately, her thumbs moving across the screen with the practiced efficiency of someone checking critical updates that could mean the difference between life and death. She wore a comfortable navy hoodie that had seen better days, soft black leggings and worn white sneakers that told the story of someone who prioritized function over fashion. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and to anyone walking past, she looked like a graduate student who had wandered into the wrong terminal by mistake. But she wasn't lost, and she certainly wasn't a mistake. She was exhausted beyond measure running on coffee and adrenaline after 54 hours without sleep, but her mind remained razor sharp because it had to be. The morning light filtering through the windows of Teterboro Airport felt different today, sharper somehow, as if the universe itself was preparing for something significant to unfold. What should have been a routine Tuesday departure from the private aviation terminal in New Jersey had instead become charged with an electricity that made everyone's skin crawl with anticipation. Outside, the rain hammered against the windows of the luxury Bombardier Global 8000, with increasing intensity, each drop sounding like bullets against the fuselage as storm clouds gathered overhead with ominous purpose. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere usually smelled of expensive leather and success, but today it reeked of tension so thick you could taste it on your tongue. Dr. Zara Williams had been awake for 54 hours straight. 54 hours of negotiations that would reshape the landscape of medical aviation, forever signatures on documents that represented hundreds of millions of dollars, phone calls that connected boardrooms from New York to Los Angeles, and handshakes that sealed deals most people could never imagine. She had flown to New York in the middle of the night because Phoenix Medical Group's acquisition of Meridian Elite Aviation couldn't wait for normal business hours, not when children's lives hung in the balance and every minute could mean the difference between a miracle and a tragedy. The irony wasn't lost on her as she sat in seat 1A of an aircraft she had just purchased, listening to a pilot who worked for a company she now owned tell security that she didn't belong there. If the situation weren't so serious, if there weren't a 7-year-old girl fighting for her life in a hospital bed 3,000 miles away, she might have found it almost amusing. But there was nothing amusing about the call she had received at 4:30 that morning. The call that had pulled her from the first real sleep she'd had in days and thrust her back into the world of medical emergencies that defined her existence. Lily Chen, 7 years old with bright eyes and dreams of becoming an astronaut, had been rushed to Seattle Children's Hospital with a ruptured brain aneurysm that was bleeding into the most delicate areas of her developing mind. The little girl's parents had begged the doctors to call Dr. Zara Williams, because she was the only pediatric neurosurgeon in the country who had successfully performed the experimental microsurgical procedure that could save Lily's life. The surgery was scheduled for 3 o'clock Pacific time, and if they took off immediately, Zara would land with barely enough time to scrub in and perform the most delicate operation of her career. Every minute that Captain Pierce wasted with his theatrics was another minute of dangerous swelling in a child's brain, another moment that brought Lily closer to permanent damage or death, and Zara could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing against her chest like a physical force. Captain Dylan Pierce had been angry for most of his 59 years on this earth, carrying resentment like other men carried wallets always present and always ready to be pulled out when the situation called for it. He had spent 30 years flying for major commercial airlines, working his way up from cramped regional jets to international wide bodies, accumulating over 25,000 flight hours and what he considered to be a spotless safety record. But Pierce's real record, the one that mattered more than any logbook could document, was written in the complaints that had followed him from carrier to carrier like shadows he could never quite outrun. There was the incident in Denver where he had refused to board a Muslim family because their teenage son was wearing a hoodie and acting suspicious. The complaint in Phoenix where he had demanded additional screening for a Hispanic passenger who had the audacity to speak Spanish while talking to his mother on the phone. The write-up in Atlanta where he had loudly questioned whether a young black businessman belonged in first class, suggesting that his ticket must have been purchased with questionable funds. Each incident had been handled quietly by airline management, swept under the rug with reprimands, mandatory diversity training sessions that Pierce sat through with barely concealed contempt, and stern warnings about customer service standards that he dismissed as political correctness run amok. But Pierce had never learned, because in his worldview, the cockpit was his kingdom, and some people simply didn't belong in his sky. The final straw had come 8 months ago when Pierce had delayed a flight for 52 minutes because he didn't like what he called the attitude of a passenger who had politely asked about the departure delay. The passenger turned out to be a federal judge, and the airline had quietly forced Pierce into early retirement with a generous severance package and a promise that he would never fly for them again. That's how he had ended up at Meridian Elite Aviation, flying rich people's private jets and telling himself it was temporary, that he would find his way back to the majors once things cooled down. But deep down, he knew he was finished with commercial aviation, and this job flying spoiled millionaires around the country was his last stand in an industry that no longer looked like him or shared his values. Standing in the doorway between the cockpit and cabin, Pierce studied the woman in seat 1A with the calculating eye of someone who had made snap judgments about people his entire career and convinced himself they were always right. Her clothes were too casual, her posture too relaxed, her entire presence too comfortable for someone who supposedly belonged on a $60 million aircraft. In his mind, the math didn't add up, and when the math didn't add up in Dylan Pierce's world, it meant someone was running a scam, and he was the only one smart enough to see through it. Carmen Rodriguez watched the confrontation building with growing horror, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the galley counter hard enough to leave marks on her palms. At 28, she had taken this job because she loved aviation, because she wanted to serve people, because she believed in the magic of flight and the way it brought the world together in ways that nothing else could match. Her grandmother had cleaned houses for wealthy families to put Carmen through college, working double shifts and saving every penny so her granddaughter could have opportunities she never dreamed of. Her parents had worked factory jobs and weekend shifts to help Carmen get through flight attendant training, sacrificing their own comfort so she could reach for the skies they had only watched from the ground. This job was supposed to be the culmination of their dreams, the moment when all their sacrifices paid off, and Carmen could finally provide for the family that had given her everything. Instead, she was watching her captain humiliate a passenger based on nothing more than the color of her skin and the casual comfort of her clothes, and she felt sick to her stomach. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step forward so we can verify your documentation." Pierce set his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been challenged in his own cockpit and couldn't imagine a world where that might change. Zara finally looked up from her phone, and when she did, the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop several degrees. Her dark eyes were intelligent, sharp, and currently very cold as they met Pierce's gaze without flinching or looking away. She didn't speak immediately because she had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than words, especially when dealing with men who were used to intimidating others into submission. When she did speak, her voice was calm and professional, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. "Good morning, Captain Pierce," she said, reading his name tag with the kind of precision that made it clear she was filing every detail away for later use. "I'm Dr. Zara Williams, and I have a confirmed reservation for this flight, all proper documentation, and I haven't done anything except sit quietly in my assigned seat while checking on a patient who needs emergency surgery." Pierce's face flushed red above his perfectly pressed collar because he hadn't expected her to be articulate professional or unafraid of his authority. In his experience, people who didn't belong somewhere usually crumbled under pressure, admitted their deception, or at least showed some sign of guilt or nervousness that confirmed his suspicions. "You don't fit the profile," Pierce said, gesturing broadly at her casual attire, as if her clothes were evidence of some crime he couldn't quite articulate but knew in his bones was being committed. The profile of what exactly, Zara asked, standing slowly and gracefully, her movement controlled like a surgeon approaching an operating table, where precision could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. "Someone who belongs on this aircraft," Pierce replied, his voice rising slightly as he felt control of the situation slipping away from him in ways he couldn't understand or prevent. Behind Zara, the other passengers were starting to take notice of the confrontation unfolding in the front of the cabin. Victoria Hayes, a sharp-eyed business executive in her 40s who had fought her way through countless boardrooms dominated by men exactly like Captain Pierce, lowered her Wall Street Journal and focused her attention on what was clearly becoming a situation that would require witnesses. Nathan Park, a tech entrepreneur with kind eyes and an expensive watch that spoke of success earned through innovation rather than inherited through privilege, glanced up from his laptop and felt his stomach clench as he recognized the familiar dynamics of discrimination playing out in front of him. Eleanor and Robert Martinez, an elderly couple traveling together after 53 years of marriage, had lived through the civil rights movement and recognized the signs of prejudice even when it was dressed up in uniforms and authority. Eleanor clutched her purse tighter as she watched a successful woman being treated like a criminal for the crime of existing in a space where someone like Pierce didn't think she belonged. All of them were staring now, and Pierce could feel their attention like heat against his back. But his pride wouldn't let him back down, because backing down would mean admitting he was wrong. And men like Dylan Pierce were never wrong about people like the woman standing in the aisle. "Listen to me carefully," Pierce said, taking a step closer and lowering his voice to what he thought was a menacing whisper, but came across as the desperate threat of a man who knew he was losing control. "I don't know what game you're playing, or what sob story you're planning to tell, but I don't fly passengers. I can't trust. And looking at you in those clothes with that attitude, I don't trust you." The words echoed through the cabin like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of shock and disbelief that spread from passenger to passenger. Victoria Hayes put down her newspaper entirely, her corporate instincts telling her that she was witnessing something that would have consequences far beyond this single flight. Nathan Park closed his laptop with a sharp click and pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen as he opened his camera app and began recording what he knew would be important evidence of discrimination in action. Eleanor Martinez whispered to her husband in Spanish, "This doesn't feel right, Roberto. This man is going to hurt that poor woman, and we can't let that happen without speaking up." But Zara didn't flinch or show fear because she had faced down prejudice before, had navigated through systems designed to keep people like her out, and had learned that the best response to hatred was often calm professionalism that exposed the ugly truth beneath polite facades. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her phone, and with movements so deliberate they seemed choreographed, she unlocked it and dialed a number that would change everything for everyone in that cabin, though only she knew it at the time. "Maria." "It's Zara," she said, when someone answered her voice carrying across the cabin with crystal clarity that made sure everyone could hear exactly what she was saying. "I'm at Teterboro Airport, aircraft tail number N952MX. Yes, I have a situation developing here. The pilot is refusing to fly because he says I don't fit his profile of someone who belongs on this aircraft. No, I haven't done anything except exist while black in first class." Pierce lunged forward as if he could stop the conversation by sheer force of will, his face now purple with rage and embarrassment. "You cannot make phone calls on my aircraft without permission, and you certainly cannot spread lies about discrimination when this is clearly about security protocols and passenger safety." Zara held up one finger in a gesture that somehow managed to be both polite and completely dismissive, continuing her conversation as if Pierce were nothing more than background noise. Yes, the pilot just told me I can't make phone calls on the aircraft. No, I'm not kidding. Yes, please initiate the protocols we discussed. Thank you, Maria. She hung up and sat back down, crossed her legs with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen next, and picked up a magazine from the seat pocket as if she were settling in for a long wait that she was perfectly prepared to endure. Pierce stared at her like she had lost her mind, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air as he tried to process what had just happened. Security is on the way, he said, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to regain some sense of control over a situation that was spiraling beyond his comprehension. I hope you have a good explanation for whatever scam you're running, because airport police don't take kindly to fraud. We'll see about that, Captain Zara replied without looking up from her magazine, her voice carrying the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing something the other person didn't. We'll definitely see about that. Outside, through the rain-streaked windows, a Teterboro Airport operations vehicle was already pulling up to the aircraft, its yellow lights flashing through the gray morning like warning signals of the storm that was about to break over everyone involved. 2 police officers stepped out into the weather, their uniforms quickly darkening with moisture as they hurried toward the aircraft steps. Behind them walked Luis Santos, the duty manager, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of a man who had been doing this job long enough to recognize when a routine passenger dispute was about to become something much more complicated and potentially dangerous for everyone involved. Carmen Rodriguez pressed herself against the galley wall, tears beginning to well in her eyes as she watched the confrontation unfold between her captain and a passenger who had done nothing wrong except board an aircraft while black. This wasn't how flights were supposed to go, wasn't how people were supposed to treat each other, and certainly wasn't the career she had dreamed about when she was studying aviation and imagining herself serving passengers with dignity and respect. But Carmen was also 28 years old and only 4 months into a career that represented years of sacrifice by her entire family, and she was terrified of losing the job she had worked so hard to get, because the airline industry was small and unforgiving, and word traveled fast about flight attendants who caused problems for their captains. Alex Chen stood frozen in the cockpit doorway, torn between loyalty to his captain and the growing certainty that he was witnessing something terrible that would haunt him for the rest of his career if he didn't find the courage to speak up. He was 36 years old, with a wife, 2 young children, and a mortgage on a house in New Jersey that represented everything he had worked for since getting his commercial pilot's license. Meridian. Elite was the best job he had ever had, with good pay, interesting flights, and passengers who were usually polite and respectful, but flying with Pierce for the past 6 months had shown him a side of aviation that made him question whether he wanted to be part of an industry that tolerated this kind of behavior from anyone, regardless of their rank or experience. The aircraft door opened with a mechanical sound that seemed to echo Pierce's growing confidence as he straightened his tie and prepared to meet the officers who he was certain would vindicate his judgment and remove the woman who had dared to challenge his authority in his own cockpit. Officer Maria Santos stepped onto the aircraft first, her dark eyes immediately scanning the cabin and taking in the tense atmosphere. The frightened flight attendant pressed against the galley wall and the passengers who were clutching their phones like lifelines in a storm they hadn't seen coming but could feel building around them. She was a 15-year veteran of the Port Authority Police Latina, tough as nails, and had exactly 0 patience for discrimination in any form, having grown up in communities where she had seen firsthand how prejudice destroyed lives and families. She had taken this call expecting a routine passenger removal, the kind of thing that happened a dozen times a week at airports across the country, but the tension in the cabin told her this was something different and potentially explosive. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly," Pierce said, striding forward with his chest puffed out like a rooster defending his territory. "We have a passenger in seat 1A who's exhibiting suspicious behavior. making unauthorized phone calls and refusing to provide proper identification when requested by the flight crew. Officer Santos looked past Pierce to Zara, who was still calmly reading her magazine and seemed completely untroubled by the arrival of law enforcement. "Ma'am, could you step forward, please, and tell me what's happening from your perspective?" Zara closed the magazine with deliberate care, placed it neatly on the seat beside her, and stood with the kind of grace that came from years of maintaining composure in high-pressure situations where people's lives hung in the balance. "Good morning, officers. I'm Dr. Zara Williams, pediatric neurosurgeon. I have a confirmed reservation for this flight, all proper documentation including my medical license and identification, and I haven't done anything except sit quietly in my assigned seat while this gentleman has harassed me based on his assumption that I don't belong here." Pierce's face went red as he gestured wildly at Zara's casual attire. "She's lying about being a doctor, officers. Look at her clothes, look at how she's dressed. Doctors don't dress like that, and they certainly don't act like that when questioned by authority figures who are responsible for the safety and security of this aircraft." "Like what exactly?" Officer Santos asked, her tone sharpening as she sensed where this conversation was heading and prepared herself for the ugly truth that was about to be exposed. Like... Pierce struggled to find words that wouldn't reveal the full extent of his prejudice while still making his point. "Like street clothes, like someone who wandered in off the street and is trying to scam their way onto a luxury aircraft they could never afford legitimately." Victoria Hayes couldn't remain silent any longer, her years of fighting discrimination in corporate boardrooms giving her both the experience and the courage to speak truth to power. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her voice cutting through the cabin with prosecutorial precision. "Officer, I've been sitting here for 30 minutes watching this man harass this woman for absolutely no reason except that she's young, black, and dressed comfortably. She's been polite, quiet, and professional while he's been aggressive, discriminatory, and frankly embarrassing to watch." Nathan Park held up his phone and spoke directly to the officers. "I've been live streaming this entire incident on social media, and we currently have over 12,000 viewers watching this confrontation unfold in real time. Everything that's been said and done has been recorded and is being broadcast to thousands of people around the world." Pierce whirled around, his eyes wide with panic. "You can't film on this aircraft without permission. That's a security violation and possibly illegal surveillance of crew members performing their duties." "Actually, sir," Officer Santos's partner, Officer James Rodriguez, said quietly, "he can. This is a public incident now, and passengers have the right to document what they observe, especially when it involves potential civil rights violations." Carmen finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper that somehow carried through the electrically charged atmosphere of the cabin. "He made me search her medical bag 3 times. She said, her words growing stronger as she realized that staying silent was no longer an option. "He said people like her always carry drugs or stolen goods, and that's why he needed extra security checks." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and the quiet hum of the aircraft's electrical systems. Pierce's mouth opened and closed like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come, because there was no way to explain away what had just been revealed. I never said that Pierce finally managed, but his voice lacked conviction, and everyone in the cabin could hear the lie in his tone. "You did." Carmen continued, her courage growing with each word as she realized this might be her only chance to do the right thing. "You said it right after she boarded, when you told me to pay special attention to her because passengers who look like her and dress like her usually don't belong in first class unless they're using stolen credit cards or drug money." Zara turned to look at Carmen with an expression that had softened from clinical detachment to something approaching gratitude. "Thank you for telling the truth," she said simply. "I know that wasn't easy for you, and I appreciate your courage in speaking up when it mattered most." But before Pierce could dig his hole any deeper, Zara's phone rang with an urgent tone that cut through the tension like an alarm bell. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted from calm professionalism to focused intensity. "Excuse me, officers, but I need to take this call. It's the hospital, and it's about the 7-year-old patient I'm flying to save." Dr. Sarah Kim's voice was tight with stress, and loud enough for everyone in the cabin to hear clearly. "Zara, where are you? Lily's intracranial pressure is rising faster than we anticipated, and her condition is deteriorating rapidly. We've got her on maximum medical management, but she needs surgery immediately. The window is closing faster than we thought. We've been delayed by a situation involving the pilot." Zara said, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as she maintained her professional composure while internally calculating how much time they were losing with every minute of Pierce's racist theater. "How much time do I have before the surgical window closes completely?" 4 hours, maybe 5 at the absolute outside. Dr. Kim replied, her voice carrying the weight of a physician who was watching a child slip away while the surgeon who could save her was trapped in an airport by bigotry and hatred. After that, even if we operate, the chances of meaningful recovery drop to almost 0. Zara hung up and turned to address the entire cabin, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years making life and death decisions under the most extreme pressure imaginable. "Officers, my name is Dr. Zara Williams, and I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon, specializing in complex brain procedures that most surgeons won't attempt. There is a 7-year-old girl named Lily Chen at Seattle Children's Hospital who has a ruptured brain aneurysm that's bleeding into her brainstem. I am the only surgeon in North America who can perform the microsurgical procedure she needs to survive." The words hit the cabin like a physical blow, and several passengers gasped audibly as the true stakes of Pierce's discrimination became clear. "Every minute this man wastes arguing about my hoodie and sneakers is another minute that child is dying while her parents pray for someone to save her life." Zara continued, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of barely controlled fury at the senseless delay. Eleanor Martinez gasped and clutched her chest. "Dear God in heaven," she whispered in Spanish before switching to English so everyone could understand. "This man is preventing a doctor from saving a baby's life because he doesn't like how she looks." Robert Martinez shook his head in disgust, his weathered hands trembling with anger as he pointed at Pierce. "Dylan, or whatever your name is, what the hell is wrong with you? You're going to let a child die because of your ignorant prejudices." Nathan Park's phone was buzzing constantly now as notifications poured in from his live stream, which had passed 25,000 viewers and was climbing rapidly as people shared the link across social media platforms. "Guys," he said to his phone camera, "this pilot just prevented a pediatric neurosurgeon from flying to save a 7-year-old's life because he thinks she looks suspicious. The hashtag racist pilot is trending nationwide right now." Pierce's face had gone pale, but his pride and prejudice were stronger than his common sense or basic human decency. "She's lying," he said, his voice rising to a near shout as he felt control of the situation slipping away completely. "She's making up this story about a sick child to manipulate your emotions and get out of trouble for whatever scam she's running. Look at her. She doesn't look like any doctor I've ever seen. And what exactly should a doctor look like?" Captain Zara asked, her voice deadly quiet in a way that made everyone in the cabin lean forward to hear her response. Pierce was sweating now, trapped by his own words, but unable to stop himself from digging deeper. Professional, respectable, appropriately dressed for someone who claims to be saving lives, not like some... He paused, seeming to realize he was about to cross a line, but unable to help himself. Not like some hood rat who probably stole that credit card and is trying to live like a celebrity for a day. The explosion of outrage was instantaneous and came from multiple directions at once. Victoria Hayes started shouting, "That's it! I'm calling my lawyer right now!" Nathan Park's live stream erupted with comments as viewers reacted in real time. "Did he just call a pediatric surgeon a hood rat? This is unbelievable. Someone, please tell me this pilot is getting fired." Eleanor Martinez stood up, all 5 feet of her grandmother's righteous fury unleashed. "Young man, I lived through segregation and Jim Crow, and you are a disgrace to that uniform. and everything it's supposed to represent. But Zara didn't shout or cry or lose her composure because she had learned long ago that emotional reactions gave people like Pierce ammunition to use against her. Instead, she did something far more dangerous than losing her temper. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that surgeons wore when they found exactly where to make the incision that would solve the problem permanently. She pulled out her phone again and dialed a number, speaking clearly enough for everyone in the cabin to hear every word. "Maria, this is Zara. Yes, I know you're monitoring the live stream. No, don't intervene yet. Let him keep talking and documenting his prejudice. Yes, initiate Protocol 7 with full legal documentation. And Maria, make sure our legal team is recording everything, because this is going to be a textbook case of workplace discrimination." She hung up and looked directly at Pierce with the kind of clinical detachment she usually reserved for examining particularly interesting pathology. "Captain Pierce, you've just made what I suspect will be the biggest mistake of your professional life, but please don't stop now. I'd like you to tell everyone exactly what else you think about people like me, because the world is watching and recording every word." Pierce was beyond rational thought, now his rage and embarrassment overriding any sense of self-preservation he might have possessed. "Fine. You want the truth. I've been flying for 30 years, and I know trash when I see it. I don't care what fake credentials you wave around or what sob story you tell about sick children. I don't care what kind of social media pressure campaign your friends are running. You don't belong on my aircraft, and I'm not taking off with you on board because I don't trust you. I don't believe you, and I don't think you have any right to be here." Nathan Park's viewer count had passed 50,000 and was climbing so rapidly the numbers were blurring. The comment section was moving faster than anyone could read. "This is the most racist thing I've ever seen. That poor doctor is trying to save a child. Someone needs to fire this pilot immediately. #racistpilot is trending worldwide." Victoria Hayes was on her phone with what sounded like a news producer. "Yes, I'm witnessing this live. Yes, I have video. Yes, this really happened. A pilot just called a pediatric neurosurgeon trash and is preventing her from flying to save a 7-year-old's life because of racial prejudice." And through it all, Zara Williams sat calmly in seat 1, reading her magazine and wearing the slight smile of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen next, while the world watched and recorded the systematic destruction of Captain Dylan Pierce's career, reputation, and future. Officer Santos Zara said, her voice cutting through Pierce's continued ranting like a surgeon's scalpel through diseased tissue before you make any decisions about removing anyone from this aircraft. "I'd like to suggest you check something that might be relevant to this situation." "What's that?" Ma'am Officer Santos asked, clearly intrigued by Zara's calm confidence in the face of Pierce's increasingly unhinged behavior. "I'd like you to check the aircraft registration records," Zara said with the kind of precise diction that came from years of testifying as an expert witness in medical malpractice cases. "Not the operating certificate or the crew credentials, but the actual ownership registration for this specific aircraft." Pierce laughed, a harsh, barking sound that carried no humor whatsoever. "What difference does that make? I work for Meridian Elite Aviation. They operate this aircraft under federal regulations, and I am the pilot in command with full authority to determine passenger suitability and security protocols." Luis Santos, the duty manager, frowned as he looked between Pierce and Zara. "Ma'am, I'm not sure how the ownership registration is relevant to a passenger dispute, but if you think it's important, I can check the Federal Aviation Administration database." "Please do," Zara said firmly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people instinctively follow her instructions even when they didn't understand why. "Aircraft tail number N952MXFAA registry database. Check who owns this plane, not who operates it, but who actually owns it." Pierce was still riding high on his righteous indignation and couldn't imagine how aircraft ownership could possibly be relevant to what he saw as a clear-cut case of passenger fraud and security concerns. "I don't care who owns it," he said dismissively. "I work for Meridian Elite Aviation. They have operational authority, and I say she goes." Luis pulled out his tablet and logged into the FAA registry database, more to humor Zara than because he thought it would matter to the resolution of what appeared to be a straightforward passenger dispute. His fingers moved across the screen as he typed in the tail number, and then he waited for the database to respond with what should have been routine registration information. The color drained from his face so quickly that Carmen thought he might actually faint right there in the cabin aisle. His hands began trembling as he stared at the screen, reading and rereading the information as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Captain Pierce Lewis said, his voice barely above a whisper, "You need to see this information immediately." Pierce was still in full authority mode, waving his hand dismissively. "I don't need to see anything except this passenger being removed from my aircraft so we can complete our departure procedures and get on with our scheduled flight," Captain Luis said, again louder this time, his voice carrying a note of urgency that cut through Pierce's bluster. "The aircraft registration shows that this plane is owned by Phoenix Medical Group." There was a moment of complete silence as Pierce processed this information, his expression shifting from smug confidence to confusion. So what he said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier bluster. "Meridian operates aircraft for various owners under management agreements. That's standard in the charter industry." Luis looked down at his tablet again, his hands still shaking as he read the information that was about to change everyone's understanding of the situation. The registered owner is listed as Dr. Zara Williams, Chief Executive Officer of Phoenix Medical Group. The silence that followed was so complete that you could hear individual raindrops hitting the aircraft windows. Pierce stared at Luis like he was speaking a foreign language. Luis stared at his tablet like it was showing him impossible information. The officers stared at Zara with new understanding dawning in their eyes. The passengers stared at Pierce with a mixture of amazement and disgust. Nathan Park's live stream audience was going absolutely insane with viewer counts climbing past 75,000 and comments flowing so fast they were just a blur of outrage, amazement, and celebration. Hashtags were forming and trending in real time. Hashtag racist pilot was #1, worldwide hashtag Zara Williams was climbing rapidly, and hashtag Meridian Shame was gaining momentum as the story spread across every social media platform simultaneously. "Oh my God," Victoria Hayes whispered, her corporate executive brain immediately grasping the full implications of what had just been revealed. Eleanor Martinez started laughing, not with malicious joy, but with the pure delight of seeing justice about to be served in the most poetic way possible. "Robert," she said to her husband, "this fool just tried to kick his own boss off our own airplane." Robert Martinez shook his head in amazement. "Dylan, you absolute idiot. You just committed career suicide in front of 50,000 witnesses. And Dr. Zara Williams, the woman who had been called trash, a hood rat, a fraud, and a security threat, stood up slowly and looked Captain Dylan Pierce directly in the eye with the kind of steady gaze that had never wavered during the most delicate surgeries of her career. "Captain Pierce," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had just revealed herself to be exactly who she claimed to be, "I want to make sure you understand what just happened here. I don't just charter this aircraft for medical emergencies. I own it. I purchased it 6 months ago as part of Phoenix Medical Group's fleet expansion." She paused, letting that revelation settle over the cabin like a shroud. But that's not the most interesting part of this situation. Another pause, another layer of devastation building. The most interesting part is that as of 9:15 this morning, Eastern Time, Phoenix Medical Group completed the acquisition of Meridian Elite Aviation for $485 million. Pierce's legs gave out completely, and he slumped against the cabin wall, his face the color of ash, as the full magnitude of his mistake became clear. His captain's hat fell off his head and rolled across the floor, coming to rest at Zara's feet, like an offering to the authority he had just discovered he had been challenging. Which means Captain Pierce Zara continued with surgical precision that I don't just own this aircraft. As of this morning, I own the entire company that signs your paychecks. She took one step toward him, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had just become his ultimate boss. You're fired. The words, "You're fired," hit the cabin like a lightning strike on a clear day. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. No one moved. No one breathed. No one seemed capable of processing what they had just witnessed. Then chaos erupted from every direction at once. Nathan Park's phone exploded with notifications as his live stream, which had started with a few hundred curious viewers, was now pushing past 100,000 people watching in real time. The comments section was moving so fast it looked like a digital waterfall of outrage, amazement, and celebration. Did she just fire him? She owns the airline plot twist of the century. This pilot just got destroyed. #racist pilot is trending worldwide. Recording history right now. Victoria Hayes jumped to her feet and started applauding her corporate instincts, telling her she had just witnessed the most perfect example of instant karma in business history. That she announced to the entire cabin was the most beautiful display of justice I have ever seen in my 30-year career. Eleanor Martinez was crying, but they were tears of pure joy mixed with relief that she had lived long enough to see this kind of prejudice meet its match in such a spectacular fashion. "Robert," she said to her husband, "did you see that? Did you see justice happen right in front of our eyes, like the hand of God reaching down to set things right?" Robert. Martinez nodded, his own eyes wide with amazement at what he had just witnessed. "Honey, I've lived 78 years on this earth, and I have never seen anything like what just happened. That woman just turned that man's hatred into his own destruction." Pierce had slid down the cabin wall until he was sitting on the floor like a broken marionette. His mouth moving but no sound coming out as he tried to process the complete and total destruction of everything he had worked for over 3 decades of flying. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world collapse in the span of 30 seconds. Officer Santos looked at Luis, then at Zara, then back at Pierce, her law enforcement training telling her she needed to verify what sounded like an incredible claim. "Ma'am, can you provide documentation to support what you just told us about owning this aircraft and acquiring the company?" Zara pulled out her phone with the calm efficiency of someone who had been prepared for exactly this question. "I'll have my assistant patch me through to Bloomberg Business Terminal for independent verification," she said, putting the phone on speaker so everyone could hear the conversation. Within seconds, a professional voice came through, clearly Bloomberg News Desk. "This is Jennifer Morrison speaking. Jennifer, this is Dr. Zara Williams, CEO of Phoenix Medical Group. Can you confirm the timestamp and details of our press release regarding the Meridian Elite Aviation acquisition?" "Yes, Dr. Williams. The release went live at 9:17 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. Phoenix Medical Group acquires Meridian Elite Aviation for $485 million. The transaction was completed overnight following 18 months of negotiations. You're now the owner of the largest medical aviation fleet in North America." "Thank you, Jennifer," Zara said before hanging up and looking directly at Officer Santos. "Is that sufficient verification, or would you like me to have my legal team send additional documentation?" Luis was frantically scrolling through his tablet, checking internal company networks and news feeds. "It's true," he said, his voice filled with amazement and horror at what he was witnessing. "It's all true. The acquisition notice just hit our internal systems. Dr. Williams is now the owner of Meridian Elite Aviation." Carmen had stopped crying and was staring at Zara with something approaching awe. "You really own the airline?" she whispered. "As of about 3 hours ago, yes," Zara confirmed. "The paperwork was finalized while I was in the air flying here from Los Angeles." Alex Chen, the co-pilot who had been standing in the cockpit doorway throughout this entire confrontation, finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, on behalf of the crew members who completely disagree with Captain Pierce's behavior and find his actions reprehensible, I want to apologize. This is not who we are as professionals, and this is not how passengers should ever be treated." Zara studied him for a moment, her surgeon's eye evaluating his sincerity and character. "What's your name, and what are your qualifications?" "Alex Chen." "First officer, I'm current on captain's certification for this aircraft type and just completed my check ride evaluation last month, though Captain Pierce told the company I wasn't ready for promotion because he wanted to maintain his seniority position and the higher pay that comes with it." Pierce's voice came out as a broken croak from where he sat, slumped against the wall. "You can't just fire me. I have a contract. I have rights. I have protections under labor agreements." Zara turned to look down at him with the clinical detachment she usually reserved for examining particularly interesting pathology specimens. "Captain Pierce, your employment contract included both a morality clause and a customer service standards clause, both of which you have violated in spectacular fashion. You're terminated for cause effective immediately with forfeiture of all benefits and severance." She turned back to the officers, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was now clearly in charge of the situation. "Officers, this man is now trespassing on my aircraft and interfering with a medical emergency that requires my immediate departure. I'd like him removed so we can proceed with saving a child's life." Officer Santos nodded and reached for her handcuffs. "Captain Pierce, you need to come with us. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct interfering with aircraft operations, and we'll be adding federal civil rights violations to the charges." Pierce struggled to his feet, his hands shaking as the full weight of his destruction finally hit him. "This isn't real. This can't be happening. This is some kind of setup, some kind of elaborate scam designed to destroy me." Nathan Park was still streaming to his massive audience, now approaching 150,000 viewers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to his phone camera, "you are watching the most epic example of instant karma in aviation history. This pilot just tried to remove his own boss from her own airplane because he didn't like her hoodie and sneakers. Victoria Hayes was on her phone with what sounded like a major news network. Yes, I'm an eyewitness. Yes, I have video evidence. Yes, this really happened. A racist pilot just called a pediatric neurosurgeon trash and tried to prevent her from flying to save a child's life, not knowing she owned the plane and the company." As Pierce was led toward the aircraft door in handcuffs, he turned back one final time, his face twisted with desperate fury. "You think you've won? You think this is over? I'll sue you for everything you have. I'll take you to court. I'll destroy you in the media. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." Zara looked at him with the kind of calm compassion that came from understanding how hatred ultimately destroyed the person who carried it. "Captain Pierce, you can't destroy someone who dedicates their life to saving children. But you've done a remarkably thorough job of destroying yourself, and you did it all on live television in front of hundreds of thousands of witnesses." As Pierce was escorted down the aircraft stairs and into a police car, passengers throughout the cabin were recording, photographing, and live streaming every moment. The story was already spreading far beyond Nathan's initial stream, picked up by news networks, trending on every social media platform, and generating the kind of viral attention that would make this incident a case study in the consequences of workplace discrimination. Luis Santos was on his radio with air traffic control before Pierce had even reached the police car. "Tower, this is Meridian N952MX requesting immediate departure clearance for Seattle-Tacoma International. We have a new pilot in command and a medical emergency requiring priority handling." "N952MX. Are you declaring a medical emergency?" came the response from the control tower. Zara took the radio from Luis, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made thousands of life and death decisions. tower. This is Dr. Zara Williams, pediatric neurosurgeon. I'm flying to Seattle Children's Hospital for emergency surgery on a 7-year-old patient with a ruptured brain aneurysm. Every minute of delay reduces her chances of survival, requesting immediate departure clearance and priority routing. Dr. Williams, you're cleared for immediate takeoff, runway 06 left. We're routing all other traffic around you. Good luck with the surgery. Alex Chen was already in the left seat running through pre-flight checks with the efficiency of a pilot who had been waiting months for the chance to prove himself as a captain. His hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, and Zara could see in his focused professionalism exactly why Pierce had been threatened by his competence. Carmen Rodriguez was securing the cabin with movements that had transformed from nervous uncertainty to confident purpose, as if speaking truth to power had unlocked something inside her that she hadn't known existed. "Dr. Williams," she called out, "I want you to know that I'm reporting everything that happened here to our Human Resources Department, and I'll testify in any legal proceedings about what I witnessed." "Thank you," Carmen Zara replied. "Your courage in speaking up when it mattered most probably saved your career and definitely helped expose a pattern of discrimination that needed to be stopped." Victoria Hayes was organizing the other passengers into an impromptu support network. "Dr. Williams, we've started a social media campaign to raise awareness about pediatric neurosurgery research. We're also coordinating with the hospital to ensure Lily's family has everything they need during this difficult time." Eleanor Martinez had pulled out knitting needles and was already working on what would become the first of dozens of blankets she would donate to the pediatric ward at Seattle Children's Hospital. "Mija," she said to Zara, "you go save that beautiful baby. We'll take care of everything else." Nathan Park was wrapping up his live stream, which had reached over 200,000 viewers and generated more engagement than anything he had ever posted. "Folks, this has been the most incredible live documentation of justice I've ever witnessed. Dr. Williams is now flying to save a child's life. Captain Pierce is in police custody facing federal charges, and the entire aviation industry is about to undergo major changes because of what we've all seen here today." As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Zara finally allowed herself to check the time on her phone. They had lost 43 minutes to Pierce's racist theater 43 precious minutes, while Lily Chen's aneurysm continued bleeding into her developing brain. But they were moving now, climbing toward 35,000 feet and racing against time toward Seattle. Behind them, growing smaller in the distance, Dylan Pierce sat in the back of a police car. His career destroyed, his reputation in ruins, and his prejudice finally exposed to a world that had no patience for that kind of hatred. The viral video of his humiliation was already being viewed by millions of people, and his name would forever be associated with the consequences of workplace discrimination. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles ahead of them, Carlos and Isabella Chen sat in a hospital waiting room, holding hands and whispering prayers in Mandarin and English, trusting that the surgeon who had fought through prejudice and hatred to reach their daughter would somehow find a way to save her life. The age of viral justice had claimed another victim, but more importantly, it was about to witness a miracle of modern medicine performed by a woman who refused to let hatred prevent her from healing. The Bombardier Global 8000 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, Alex Chen having executed a flawless approach that would have made his former captain jealous if Pierce hadn't been sitting in a jail cell contemplating the complete destruction of his career and reputation. A medical helicopter was waiting on the tarmac, its rotors already spinning, as Zara grabbed her surgical bag and prepared to transfer from one aircraft to another in her desperate race against time. The bag that Pierce had called suspicious contained instruments that had saved hundreds of children's lives, and now it would hopefully save one more. "Dr. Williams," Alex called out as she reached the aircraft door. "It's been an honor flying with you. Good luck with the surgery." "Thank you, Alex," she replied, pausing for just a moment. "You're going to make an excellent captain, and I'm promoting you to head of flight operations for our medical fleet effective immediately. Carmen Rodriguez, stood at attention as Zara passed, tears in her eyes, but also strength in her posture that hadn't been there when the flight began. "Doctor, I'll never forget what you showed me today about courage and standing up for what's right." The helicopter lifted off into the gray Seattle sky, banking hard toward the cluster of buildings that made up Seattle Children's Hospital complex. Inside, Zara reviewed Lily Chen's latest brain scans on her tablet, while the city rushed past below them at 120 miles per hour. Dr. Sarah Kim was waiting at the helicopter landing pad when they touched down, her scrubs already on, and her expression tight with the kind of controlled urgency that came from watching a child slip away while the surgeon who could save her was trapped in an airport by bigotry and institutional racism. "How is she?" Zara asked as they rushed through the hospital corridors toward the surgical suite. "Stable but declining," Sarah replied. "We've managed to control the intracranial pressure, but barely. The surgical window is closing rapidly." "How much time did that racist pilot cost us?" 43 minutes, Zara said grimly. 43 minutes of a 7-year-old's life wasted on hatred and prejudice. In the family waiting area, Carlos and Isabella Chen looked up with desperate hope as Zara approached them, still in her traveling clothes, but radiating the kind of professional confidence that had reassured hundreds of families over the years. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen." "I'm Dr. Williams. I'm sorry I was delayed, but I'm here now and we're going to take excellent care of Lily. The surgery is complex, but I've performed this procedure successfully many times, and I have every confidence that your daughter is going to recover completely." Isabella Chen took Zara's hands in hers, tears streaming down her face. "Doctor, we saw the video of what happened on the airplane. We know you fought to get to our daughter when someone tried to stop you because of how you look. Thank you for not giving up on her." Mrs. Chen, Zara said gently, "Nothing in this world could have prevented me from reaching Lily. Your daughter is going to be fine, and when she wakes up, she's going to have the same bright future she had before this happened." Operating Room 7 at Seattle Children's Hospital was a cathedral of modern medicine, with overhead lights that could illuminate tissue at the microscopic level, and equipment that represented the pinnacle of neurosurgical technology. Under those lights, Dr. Zara Williams worked with the precision and artistry that had made her reputation as one of the finest pediatric brain surgeons in the world. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes, with Zara's hands never wavering despite her exhaustion, her focus never faltering despite the emotional trauma of the day, and her skill never compromising, despite the delays caused by Pierce's discrimination. When she finally placed the last microscopic suture and stepped back from the operating table, Lily Chen's vital signs were strong and stable. "Surgery completed successfully," Zara announced to her team. "Aneurysm repaired with complete preservation of surrounding tissue. No complications. She's going to make a full recovery." The operating room erupted in quiet celebration as nurses wiped tears from their eyes and residents applauded softly. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had assisted throughout the procedure, squeezed Zara's shoulder with admiration and relief. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, in a New Jersey detention facility, Dylan Pierce watched news coverage of Lily's successful surgery on a small television mounted high on the cell wall. His racist delays had nearly killed a child, but Zara Williams' skill and determination had prevailed despite every obstacle he had placed in her path. The irony was devastating. His hatred had tried to prevent healing, but it had ultimately failed against the power of compassion, skill, and justice. Pierce had lost everything: his career, his family, his reputation, and his future, while the woman he had tried to destroy had saved a life and become a symbol of triumph over prejudice. 6 months later, 7-year-old Lily Chen stood at the observation deck of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Her small hands pressed against the glass as she watched aircraft take off and land with the wonder of a child whose dreams had survived both a medical crisis and the hatred of small-minded adults. At 7 years old, she was completely recovered from her surgery, her cognitive function perfect and her spirit unbroken by the medical emergency that had brought her so close to tragedy. But more than that, she had become a symbol of resilience and hope, proof that children could overcome anything when surrounded by people who believed in healing rather than hatred. "Mom, look," Lily exclaimed, pointing at a Phoenix Medical Group jet that was taxiing toward takeoff. "That's one of Dr. Zara's planes. She's probably flying to save another kid right now." Isabella Chen wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her perfectly healthy daughter bounce with excitement, remembering the terrifying day 6 months ago, when they had thought they were going to lose her to a ruptured aneurysm that was bleeding into her brain. Carlos Chen lifted his daughter onto his shoulders so she could get a better view of the aircraft. "Lily, do you remember what Dr. Zara told you about why she became a doctor? She said she wanted to make sure that every kid who got sick could get better and chase their dreams." Lily replied with the serious tone that children use when discussing important matters. "And she said that mean people like that pilot couldn't stop good people from helping if they were brave enough to keep trying." Inside the Phoenix medical jet that Lily was watching, Dr. Zara Williams was reviewing case files for twin boys in Denver who needed emergency heart surgery. Her dedication to saving children's lives unchanged by the media attention and accolades that had followed her confrontation with Pierce. She was exhausted, as she always was, but fulfilled in ways that money and recognition could never provide. The incident at Teterboro had led to industry-wide changes that would prevent future discrimination. But for Zara, the real victory was in the lives saved, and the children who would grow up in a world slightly more just than the one she had inherited. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carmen Rodriguez, who was now Director of Passenger Services for the entire Phoenix medical fleet. "Dr. Williams thought you'd want to know we just completed our 1,000th bias-free flight under the new protocols. 0 discrimination complaints and our patient satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry. Thank you for showing us what real leadership looks like." Zara smiled as she typed back, "You showed yourselves, Carmen. I just provided the opportunity." The transformation had been swift and comprehensive. The Federal Aviation Administration had implemented mandatory anti-discrimination training for all crew members. Airlines nationwide had adopted zero-tolerance policies for passenger profiling. The Zara Williams protocols had become standard across the industry, ensuring that what happened to her would never happen to anyone else. But the most profound changes were personal. Alex Chen had become chief pilot for Phoenix Medical's entire fleet and established a scholarship program for minority student pilots. Victoria Hayes had created the Witness Protection Initiative, providing legal support for people who documented discrimination. Eleanor and Robert Martinez traveled to schools sharing their story and teaching children that you're never too old to stand up for what's right. As for Dylan Pierce, the man whose hatred had sparked this transformation, he had faded into the obscurity he deserved. He worked minimum-wage jobs when he could find employers who hadn't heard his name, lived in a studio apartment, and tried to avoid any situation where he might be recognized from the viral video that had made him famous for all the wrong reasons. But 18 months after his disgrace, he received an unexpected letter from Dr. Zara Williams. It was brief and professional. "Mr. Pierce, Lily Chen has made a complete recovery and just started 2nd grade. She wants to be a pilot when she grows up. I thought you should know that your attempt to prevent me from saving her life ultimately failed. Children are remarkably resilient and forgiving. I hope someday you can find a way to heal from the hatred that destroyed your life." Pierce read the letter dozens of times, searching for malice or mockery, but finding only the clinical observation of a physician, and perhaps the smallest suggestion that even someone like him might be capable of change. As Lily Chen watched her hero's aircraft disappear into the Seattle sky, carrying Dr. Zara Williams toward another emergency and another child who needed saving, she turned to her parents with the kind of certainty that only children possess. "When I become a pilot," she announced, "I'm going to fly Dr. Zara to all the hospitals really fast, so no mean captains can ever stop her from saving kids again." Isabella Chen knelt down to her daughter's level and smiled through her tears. "Lily, you're going to be the best pilot in the sky, but you know what's going to make you even more special than flying fast? What, Mama? You're going to fly with love in your heart instead of hate, just like Dr. Zara taught us." And that's what the very best pilots know, that flying isn't about keeping people apart, it's about bringing them together. Lily hugged her mother tightly, and in that embrace was the promise of a generation that would inherit a sky made safer and more inclusive by a surgeon who had refused to be grounded by prejudice, and a little girl who had survived both medical crisis and human cruelty, to dream of soaring above the hatred that had once tried to destroy them both. The story of Flight N952MX had become legend in aviation circles, not because of the discrimination that occurred, but because of how completely and quickly justice had been served. Children like Lily grew up believing they could achieve anything. Students from diverse backgrounds entered aviation programs without fear, and passengers traveled, knowing they would be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance. Dr. Zara Williams continued saving lives one surgery at a time, never speaking publicly about Pierce again, but never forgetting that hatred always reveals itself, and when it does, the world is watching and recording, and ready to ensure that justice prevails over prejudice, that healing triumphs over hatred, and that love ultimately conquers the fear that drives people to judge others by the color of their skin, rather than the content of their character. What would you have done if you were on that plane? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have found the courage to speak up for what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, if it reminded you that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they witness injustice and choose to act, then please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, justice, and hope. Because when we stand together against discrimination, we write the next chapter of these stories together, and we create a world where children like Lily Chen can dream of flying without fear of the prejudice that once tried to keep people like Dr. Zara Williams grounded. Thank you for watching. And remember, in a world that sometimes seems full of Captain Pierces, we can all choose to be more like Dr. Zara Williams.